Imagine being captured in war, shipped thousands of miles across the ocean, and told by propaganda that your enemies would starve you, chain you, and grind down your spirit. Now imagine stepping off that train in America and finding the exact opposite. German prisoners of war in World War II expected cruelty. What they got instead were orderly camps, hot meals, and even, unthinkably, concerts performed by American women. Yes, women. Dressed in summer skirts and carrying violins, pianos, and hymnals, they walked straight into compounds filled with enemy soldiers. The reaction? Silence. Stunned, breathless silence. For men who hadn't seen a woman in years, the sight alone was overwhelming. And when the music began, when Beethoven, Schubert, and even Silent Night drifted through the barbed wire, the very idea of enemy and ally blurred for just a moment. This is the story of how music, kindness, and the courage of ordinary women left German prisoners shaken, speechless, and forever changed. If stories like this captivate you, the hidden human moments that shaped history, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe for more powerful untold tales, and share it with someone who loves history as much as you do. Every click helps bring forgotten voices back into the light. They boarded ships across the Atlantic as defeated soldiers, weighed down by fear. Nazi propaganda had filled their heads with horror stories, starvation, torture, chains, and endless humiliation at the hands of their American captors. The journey itself only deepened the unease. Packed into guarded convoys, they crossed a dangerous ocean where U-boats lurked beneath the waves. Every splash, every shadow, carried the possibility of sudden destruction and death. When the ships finally reached American shores, exhaustion mixed with dread. Some prisoners whispered prayers, others clenched fists in silence. They expected cruel guards, filthy camps, and endless punishment. Instead, what they found disoriented them completely. The camps were not collapsing hovels or muddy trenches. They were neat and almost unnervingly orderly. Wooden barracks stood in straight rows, windows screened, bunks solid and clean. For men hardened by filth and blood, it felt surreal. Meals stunned them most of all. Plates held steaming meat, vegetables, bread, and even desserts. Coffee, rare in war-torn Europe, was served daily. Sugar appeared in abundance, luxuries many German civilians back home had not seen for years. The predictability of it unsettled them. Roll call came at dawn, but soon after, life settled into a strange rhythm. Work details, sports, books, even newspapers, opportunities they never imagined possible inside a prison compound. Some dismissed these offerings at first, sneering that it was propaganda in another form. Yet the sheer existence of such privileges chipped away at certainty. Could an enemy truly allow such dignity for captured soldiers? Whispers spread quickly between bunks. Guards were stern but not brutal, and discipline felt measured rather than merciless. The absence of cruelty, where it had been expected, created confusion, even unease among battle-hardened prisoners. In Germany, prisoners of war were often treated harshly, their humanity buried beneath labels of enemy. To be handled with care here felt unnatural, like walking inside a picture that clashed with everything they believed. At night, beneath the hum of insects and the glow of watchtowers, men whispered about home. They compared rations to the hunger their families surely endured, marveling at how their captors fed them better than loved ones. The strangeness deepened during work assignments. Some repaired farm equipment, others harvested crops. Farmers occasionally waved from a distance, treating them not like monsters, but like hired hands, another crack in the terrifying image propaganda had built. Even access to books and language lessons challenged assumptions. Why give prisoners English classes? Why allow them to read? It felt less like cruelty and more like some mysterious attempt at influence, something far harder to resist. The barbed wire remained, of course. Guard towers stood tall, rifles always near. But even these constant reminders of captivity could not erase the bizarre reality. Captivity here was oddly humane, almost disturbingly civilized. Some soldiers tried to resist the feeling. They reminded themselves of comrades lost in battle, of destruction unleashed by Allied bombers. Yet as days stretched into weeks, the contradictions pressed harder, unsettling the very foundations of belief. Inside the barracks, debates erupted. Was this kindness a trap? A strategy to soften them? Or was it impossibly genuine? For men raised on rigid discipline and propaganda, the question lingered like a splinter. It was not freedom. It was not comfort. But compared to their fears, it was something unexpected, something that shook their certainty. And in that unsettling gap between fear and reality, their story truly began. Because what none of them knew yet, what no propaganda could ever have prepared them for, was that music and the arrival of women inside the wire would transform captivity into something far more extraordinary than survival. The first weeks of captivity settled into a rhythm, strange but steady. German soldiers, once accustomed to mud, chaos, and sudden death, now lived under strict timetables. There was order, even predictability behind the barbed wire. Every day began the same way. Dawn roll call. The guards counted men with precision, rifles slung casually across shoulders. Then, instead of punishment or endless drills, the prisoners returned to barracks to find hot breakfast waiting. For men expecting starvation, the meals felt surreal. Eggs, potatoes, bread, sometimes even bacon. These were luxuries unimaginable in a Europe crushed by shortages. The abundance unsettled them more than hunger ever could. Work details filled much of the day. Prisoners repaired farm machinery, harvested crops, or built fences. The tasks were demanding but rarely cruel. To their amazement, American officers treated labor more like necessity than punishment. Sports became a cornerstone of camp life. Soccer fields were marked in dust with wooden goals. Matches erupted with fierce energy, crowds of prisoners cheering loudly while guards watched with faint amusement from the sidelines. Books appeared as well. Some were German classics, others English volumes placed deliberately in the camp library. The men argued over Goethe and Shakespeare, though many secretly studied English phrases, curious about their captors' language. Classes followed, organized under watchful supervision. Some prisoners taught mathematics, others instructed history or science. What stunned them most was being allowed to continue intellectual pursuits. Prison life began to feel strangely like a university locked behind wire. Letters from home offered brief glimpses into Germany's collapse. Mothers wrote of hunger, sisters spoke of air raids, fathers mentioned ration lines stretching endlessly. The contrast between their families' suffering and their relative comfort was unbearable. Some prisoners admitted guilt. Eating well while families starved felt like betrayal. Others rationalized, believing survival itself was duty enough. In quiet moments, men debated morality, each wrestling with the same unspoken shame. Yet, despite internal conflict, routines brought stability. Work, sports, reading, and study filled hours once spent in chaos. Even boredom, dull though it seemed, was preferable to the terror of trenches and artillery. Not all accepted this rhythm so easily. A few resisted, scowling at privileges, dismissing kindness as manipulation. But their protests rang hollow. Every steaming plate, every soccer match contradicted the narrative they had once believed. Conversations at night reflected the divide. Some men whispered cautiously about America's strength, its calm discipline, its peculiar generosity. Others hissed reminders, "Never forget, we are prisoners." Yet even in protest, doubt crept in. The guards remained constant figures, watchful, armed, yet oddly human. Some cracked jokes, others nodded politely when passing. Discipline never faltered, but cruelty never dominated. That balance bewildered men who had expected fists and boots. Sundays brought unexpected quiet. Chaplains visited, offering services. Hymns floated across the compound, stirring memories of village churches back home. For a moment, war receded, replaced by shared faith, even within a prison yard. Some men began sketching scenes of camp life. The guard towers against sunsets, soccer games frozen mid-kick, portraits of comrades. Art, once unthinkable in captivity, bloomed inside wooden barracks, hidden from the watchful eyes of war. The monotony, however, left room for whispers. Rumors spread like sparks. Some spoke of concerts, of local civilians offering to visit. Others dismissed it as fantasy. Still, the thought alone stirred restless anticipation. For now, though, life marched forward predictably. Meals, work, letters, books, soccer, hymns, each day folded into the next. And yet beneath that routine, a tension simmered, waiting for something extraordinary to finally break the silence. The men did not know it, but their captivity was about to change forever. The rumors were true, and soon the fences themselves would tremble with music carried by unexpected, unforgettable voices. Life behind the barbed wire had settled into a predictable rhythm, but monotony weighed heavily. Then, one evening, hushed conversations in the barracks carried a peculiar rumor. Music might soon echo inside the compound. At first, men scoffed. How could Americans, their enemies, waste time entertaining prisoners? The idea seemed absurd, even insulting. Most assumed it was another trick, whispered by guards to sow confusion among restless captives. But the rumor refused to fade. Each night, as lights dimmed and barracks quieted, whispers returned. Local communities, some said, wanted to send choirs, musicians, maybe even women to perform concerts inside prison camps. The very suggestion unsettled them. In Germany, prisoners were kept far from civilians, especially women. The Nazi state allowed no softness toward enemies. The thought of cultural exchange across barbed wire sounded impossible, even dangerous. Yet curiosity gnawed at them. What kind of music would Americans bring? Military marches? Patriotic songs? Or perhaps attempts at propaganda, melodies designed to humiliate or manipulate them into submission? The uncertainty stirred unease. Some prisoners secretly longed for it, though they never admitted so aloud. Music meant memory. Villages, weddings, festivals, evenings in taverns. A single song could carry them, if only briefly, beyond the fences into another world. Guards, too, seemed to shift uneasily. Rumors reached them as well. Some muttered about security risks, others smirked knowingly. Yet no one confirmed or denied. The silence only sharpened the anticipation festering inside the barracks. As weeks passed, small signs appeared. Wooden benches were stacked in a recreation yard. A platform was quietly assembled. Prisoners watched, pretending not to care, but eyes lingered. Something unusual was indeed taking shape. When notices appeared on bulletin boards, disbelief gave way to murmurs of astonishment. A special program would be held. Local women's groups, it read, in cooperation with the U.S. Army and USO, would perform. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Women? Inside the camp? The idea was unthinkable. For men who had not seen a female face in years, the thought alone sent ripples of shock across the compound. Some prisoners laughed bitterly, insisting no American government would allow such folly. Others warned it must be a trick, perhaps to test discipline. Yet even cynics could not stop glancing toward the yard with nervous excitement. That night, conversations swelled with speculation. What would they wear? What would they sing? Could it really be true that women, their supposed enemies, would step into a cage full of captured German soldiers? For men hardened by years of battle who had last seen wives or sweethearts on hurried train platforms, the possibility rattled them more deeply than rifles or barbed wire ever could. Anticipation crackled like static. Still, fear lingered. What if the concerts humiliated them, mocking their culture? What if American songs ridiculed their homeland? Beneath curiosity pulsed dread, because music carried power, and no one knew how it would be used. Days stretched like years. Prisoners tried distracting themselves with soccer matches, work assignments, or sketching in notebooks, but every clang of a hammer in the recreation yard pulled their eyes back to the stage, rising slowly. The guards remained tight-lipped, offering no explanations. Their silence, whether deliberate or careless, only heightened the suspense. Men lay awake at night, whispering theories, restless as children awaiting a mystery they could neither dismiss nor control. By the time the benches were set and the stage complete, doubt no longer mattered. Something extraordinary was coming, and though none could say what form it would take, every heart beat faster with expectation. Behind the wire, men who had fought and bled for the Reich now waited, not for orders, not for rations, but for music. The very thought was as disorienting as it was irresistible. The day arrived with strange electricity in the air. Prisoners pressed against the wire, straining for a glimpse of what lay beyond. Guards stood stiff, rifles ready, their faces betraying unease they could not hide. Engines hummed in the distance. Cars pulled slowly toward the camp gates. Every head turned. Instead of grim officials or stern officers, the prisoners saw something unimaginable. Young women stepping out in bright summer dresses. The camp fell silent, utterly silent. Hundreds of soldiers, men who had faced artillery and death, now stood frozen by the sight of women carrying sheet music, hymnals, and instruments through guarded gates. Some prisoners lowered their eyes, overwhelmed. Others stared openly, their jaws slack, unable to reconcile what they were witnessing. The simple sound of female laughter drifting across the yard felt foreign, almost otherworldly. The visitors walked confidently toward the makeshift stage, greeted by the commandant. Hats tilted stylishly, skirts swayed in the breeze. For men deprived of tenderness, the scene hit harder than any battlefield memory. When the women climbed the stage, the crowd remained stiff, benches filled with uneasy anticipation. Guards scanned constantly, ready for any disturbance. Yet not a whisper broke the heavy, waiting silence. Then a piano's first notes rang out. Beethoven, no less. Music born in Germany, carried now by an American woman's hands. A ripple moved through the audience, faces tightening, hearts leaping at a sound both familiar and impossible. For many, it was too much. Some lowered their heads in quiet awe, others straightened in sudden pride. To hear their homeland's music performed here felt like a bridge across impossible distance. The program shifted. A woman stood, her voice light and clear, singing an American folk tune. The words were foreign, but the melody carried warmth, painting landscapes of fields and rivers far beyond barbed wire. Whispers spread as prisoners tried to translate fragments for their comrades. Some simply closed their eyes, letting melody replace monotony. For a moment, fences and towers vanished, replaced by something startlingly human. The next piece stunned them further. A violinist drew out Schubert's Ave Maria. Instinctively, the men rose in silent respect. The hymn carried them back to churches, families, and faiths nearly forgotten in the grind of war. Without pause, the performers launched into Yankee Doodle. The absurdity struck like lightning. Nervous laughter broke the spell. For minutes, the sharp line between enemy and ally blurred into something awkwardly shared. Half amusement, half recognition. The true miracle came with Silent Night. The women began softly, in English. Then German voices joined hesitantly, swelling with each line until the entire camp sang together. Two languages, one song carried into the night sky. Guards shifted uneasily, but even they seemed touched. The sound was not rebellion. It was reverence, a fragile truce woven by melody. In that moment, war itself seemed to fall briefly, impossibly silent. When the final notes faded, the prisoners remained frozen, unable to clap, unwilling to let the moment end. Then applause erupted, raw and unrestrained, echoing against barrack walls, spilling beyond the barbed wire. Some men shouted thanks in broken English. Others simply stared, memorizing every detail, the tilt of a hat, the curve of a smile, the scent of perfume carried faintly on the summer air. The concert ended, but the spell lingered. As guards escorted the women back to waiting cars, prisoners sat rooted in place, unsure if they had just lived reality or dreamt an impossible vision. That night, in wooden barracks, men lay awake replaying the scene again and again. Music, laughter, and the impossible presence of women had pierced the armor of propaganda and captivity, leaving them forever changed. The first concert had shattered expectations, leaving prisoners stunned. But it was only the beginning. When the women returned weeks later, something had changed. The men no longer sat rigid with disbelief. They leaned forward eagerly. This time, anticipation filled the compound before the first note. Conversations buzzed across benches, men whispering guesses about which songs they might hear, wondering if another German melody might slip into the program. The women opened with American standards, Home on the Range and You Are My Sunshine. The words were foreign, but the imagery of farms, rivers, and warmth painted vivid pictures even for those who understood little. Prisoners closed their eyes, imagining landscapes far from ruined German cities. The songs spoke not of tanks or armies, but of ordinary life, of families and fields, of quiet mornings untouched by destruction. Then came a surprise. Guards allowed prisoners themselves to sing. Nervously at first, voices rose in unison. Die Lorelei, a German folk song steeped in memory, its haunting melody carrying across the silent camp yard. The American visitors listened intently, some visibly moved despite not understanding the words. When the final note faded, they applauded openly, startling the prisoners, who lowered their heads, uncertain how to receive such recognition. The effect was profound. For men reduced to numbers behind barbed wire, the applause was validation, an acknowledgement of culture and identity that no uniform, no defeat could erase. It was humanity given back. Encouraged, the pattern repeated at later concerts. Germans offered folk songs, sometimes wistful, sometimes joyful. In reply, the women sang American hymns or playful tunes, the exchanges becoming less performance, more conversation across borders. Each side revealed fragments of its soul. Songs of forests, rivers, and mothers' lullabies mingled with melodies of cowboys, gospel choirs, and small-town dreams. The distance between them shrank, carried away on rising voices. For the prisoners, it stirred deep longing. Some thought of mothers humming the same melodies in distant kitchens. Others remembered village festivals or evenings in taverns where songs flowed freely before war consumed everything. Guards watched warily, rifles never lowered. Yet even they noticed the transformation. Men who once sulked in barracks now hummed refrains during work. Fewer scuffles broke out. Music soothed in ways discipline never could. Letters home hinted at the experiences, though censorship struck heavily. Still, words slipped through. They let us sing. We were applauded. Our songs were not forgotten. Families in ruined towns read them in disbelief. The emotional power of these exchanges unsettled many prisoners. Could enemies truly honor their traditions? Could women from America really stand applauding German soldiers who, months earlier, fought desperately across Europe? The contradiction gnawed endlessly, and yet the memory of shared voices proved undeniable. Men rehearsed quietly in evenings, preparing responses to future visits. Makeshift choirs formed, harmonies polished in secret, as though music had become resistance against despair. When performances ended, prisoners carried melodies back to bunks like treasures. They hummed verses softly, voices mingling in the dark, clinging to fragile connections forged across cultures, across fences, across everything war demanded they hate. The Americans, too, seemed changed. Some smiled warmly at German songs, recognizing beauty where they expected only enmity. Their laughter, their applause, became as important as the music itself, a reminder that recognition could cross even battle lines. For a few hours on those summer nights, war receded. Enemies became an audience and performers, cultures meeting in fragile harmony. Songs built bridges barbed wire could not erase, fragile but unforgettable, notes echoing long after silence fell. And so, each concert became more than entertainment. They were encounters that blurred boundaries, softened hatred, and reminded both sides that even amidst global conflict, music could carry truths no bullet or speech could silence. For all the power of music, it was not the melodies alone that unsettled the prisoners. It was the women themselves. Their very presence inside barbed wire struck harder than any performance could. Months, sometimes years, had passed since many had last seen wives, fiancées, or sweethearts. War had severed them from tenderness, replacing feminine voices with orders barked by officers and the endless thunder of artillery. Now, suddenly, women walked casually into compounds filled with men who had once been their nation's enemies. Dresses swayed, perfume lingered faintly in the air, and the simple act of laughter carried devastating force. Eyes followed every movement, the way a violinist adjusted her hair, how a singer folded sheet music, how one tilted her hat against the sun. Each detail burned into memory, magnified by absence. Conversations dropped to whispers whenever the women spoke. Even simple greetings rattled hardened soldiers. When one performer thanked them for listening, like gentlemen, the word itself stunned the camp, echoing louder than any rifle shot. Prisoners were enemies, captives, numbers, but suddenly they were addressed as men. That fragile recognition pierced through propaganda's armor, leaving them vulnerable, confused, and strangely grateful for a word once taken for granted. Some avoided looking directly, too embarrassed, ashamed, or overwhelmed. Others stared hungrily, trying to memorize everything. The colors of dresses, the curve of a smile, the tremble of a note lingering in the summer air. The guards remained vigilant, rifles angled across their chests, eyes sweeping constantly. Yet they did not interfere. That very trust, that women could stand unarmed among enemy soldiers, was a shock prisoners could not comprehend. In Germany, such a thing was unimaginable. Women were shielded from prisoners, forbidden from mingling with captives. Any act of kindness toward enemies risked condemnation, even punishment. Yet here, Americans allowed it openly. The contrast shattered assumptions. If America was truly decadent, dangerous, corrupt, as propaganda insisted, how could its women walk freely into prison camps, smiling, speaking, offering music without fear? The question gnawed at every listener. One prisoner later confessed that his world shifted when a violinist smiled and waved casually after finishing her piece. That tiny gesture carried more weight than speeches, disproving lies he had believed for years. Others described the experience as haunting. Deprived of feminine presence for so long, the sound of female voices awakened emotions they had buried. Desire mingled with nostalgia, longing with shame, leaving men restless afterward. Night in the barracks became a swirl of whispers. Some men replayed every gesture, recalling the tilt of a hat or the glint of a brooch. Others lay awake, haunted by a single laugh. The shock lingered beyond the concerts. Even during work details, memories of the women intruded. Men hummed softly, glancing at fences, imagining the stage, the voices, the possibility that kindness could appear again. A guard later admitted he had opposed the visits at first. But after seeing hardened men sit quietly, spellbound by women's presence, he realized discipline alone could never achieve what a smile accomplished. Not every prisoner welcomed the feelings stirred within. Some scowled, insisting it was manipulation, weakness. Yet even they could not deny the strange warmth that lingered after each performance, unsettling certainty with something dangerously human. The women had not come with weapons, nor with lectures. They came with music, voices, and smiles, and in their presence, men who had once marched beneath swastikas felt, if only briefly, entirely human again. Behind wire and rifles, the war continued. But for those who sat on wooden benches, watching women walk across makeshift stages, captivity no longer meant only survival. It meant glimpses of a world worth returning to. For the guards, concert nights carried a different kind of tension. Rifles slung across their shoulders, eyes scanning constantly, they balanced discipline with unease, unsure whether music would calm prisoners or ignite something uncontrollable. Every performance brought dozens of unarmed women inside a compound filled with enemy soldiers. The soldiers wore neat uniforms, yes, but they were still combatants, men who only months before had fired on Americans. Commanders debated fiercely behind closed doors. Some argued these concerts were reckless indulgences, exposing civilians to unpredictable risks. Others insisted morale mattered, that music soothed tensions, reducing unrest in ways barbed wire alone could never achieve. The Geneva Convention required humane treatment, but said nothing of concerts. Allowing cultural programs was voluntary. America's decision revealed confidence in its strength and security, but also a willingness to gamble on unconventional forms of control. On concert nights, discipline tightened. Extra guards manned towers, rifles loaded, eyes trained on every flicker of movement. Silence fell heavier than usual, as if everyone sensed the delicate balance between order and chaos. Yet what the guards witnessed astonished them. Instead of restlessness, prisoners sat still, almost reverent. Men who once shouted or fought among themselves now leaned forward, eyes fixed, spellbound by songs drifting into the camp air. One guard later recalled expecting trouble, catcalls, rowdiness, or worse. Instead, he saw men weep quietly, their shoulders shaking as music unearthed memories of mothers, wives, or childhood churches buried beneath years of war. The realization spread quickly among the watchful. These concerts weren't weakening authority, they were strengthening it. Content prisoners fought less, argued less, and worked more willingly. Music proved itself a weapon, subtle but powerful. Still, the danger never disappeared. Guards kept hands near triggers, imagining worst-case scenarios, an escape attempt, an outburst, or desperation boiling over. The very presence of women heightened both vulnerability and vigilance in equal measure. Officers recorded their observations meticulously. Reports noted a remarkable drop in incidents after performances. Barracks were quieter, discipline easier, unrest rarer. Whatever risks the concerts posed, the results were undeniable and difficult to dismiss. Not all soldiers agreed. Some muttered that it was indecent, that women had no place among captured enemies. Others feared blurred lines between captor and captive, discipline softened by too much humanity. But the evidence kept mounting. The men sat quietly when women sang, their voices low afterward, their tempers tempered. The guards, who bore the brunt of daily unrest, began to see the value firsthand. Some admitted privately that they too felt changed. Watching prisoners respond to music with reverence instead of hostility made the enemy seem less monstrous. It softened hatred, even within men sworn to vigilance. Still, orders remained clear. Rifles stayed loaded, towers manned, fences locked. Trust was never absolute, only tempered. But within that rigid framework, moments of humanity slipped through, leaving impressions neither guards nor prisoners could forget. The tension extended beyond camp fences. Newspapers carried debates. Was it wise to let women step into enemy compounds? Some readers applauded, others condemned, while the soldiers stationed inside lived the contradiction daily. For many guards, the concerts became unexpected lessons. They had been trained to view Germans as threats, as enemies beyond redemption. Yet each performance revealed something unsettling. They were also men, listening, remembering, feeling. The dilemma never truly ended. Guards walked a tightrope, balancing caution with compassion, suspicion with observation. Yet over time, most conceded that music achieved something patrols and punishments could not. It restored order through recognition. And so rifles stayed ready, towers loomed, but the songs continued. Even those sworn to enforce discipline could not deny what they witnessed. Humanity bridging wire, softening edges, changing captor and captive alike in quiet, lasting ways. Outside the barbed wire, not everyone approved of the concerts. In nearby towns, debates erupted. Was it compassion, or was it folly, to let American women walk freely into camps of captured German soldiers? Church groups often defended the practice. To them, extending kindness even to enemies was a moral duty, proof that democracy fought not just with weapons, but with charity, dignity, and spiritual conviction. Letters to local newspapers revealed sharp divides. Some praised the initiative as a triumph of humanity, evidence that America's values stood stronger than Nazism. Others condemned it as reckless, shameful, even dangerous. Critics asked pointed questions. Why should resources go toward entertaining prisoners when American soldiers bled overseas? Why should women risk exposure to men who only months before aimed rifles at their countrymen? Supporters countered with equal passion. Keeping prisoners calm reduced unrest, made camps safer, and upheld America's reputation as a civilized power. Compassion, they argued, was not weakness. It was strategy, discipline expressed through generosity. Some families of American servicemen bristled at the stories. To them, kindness toward enemies felt like betrayal. Mothers who buried sons questioned why German soldiers deserved music while their own heard only artillery. Yet for others, the concerts symbolized confidence. Only a nation secure in itself, strong in resources and morale, could afford to treat enemies humanely. It was a demonstration of power, cloaked in mercy. Community organizations became deeply involved. Women's auxiliaries, church choirs, patriotic societies all volunteered eagerly, seeing performances as contributions to the war effort. Some wanted to showcase culture, others sought solace in acts of service. But not everyone in the camp's shadows shared enthusiasm. Farmers grumbled that labor was being wasted. Shopkeepers muttered that civilians had no place inside barbed wire. The arguments spilled into town halls and dinner tables. Even among the guards, opinions varied. Some worried about blurred boundaries, discipline softened by kindness. Others pointed out the clear results. Quieter barracks, fewer fights, prisoners strangely more cooperative after each night of music. For German prisoners themselves, these debates were distant, almost irrelevant. What mattered was what they felt firsthand: the shock, the warmth, the confusion of being treated as men, not monsters, in the heart of enemy soil. Still, word of the concerts spread. Families back in Germany, reading censored letters, struggled to believe accounts of American women singing for their captured sons. For many, it seemed too strange, too impossible to accept. Historians later noted how this divide reflected America's own contradictions. A nation at war wrestled with identity, ruthless enemy on the battlefield, yet host capable of generosity within its own guarded fences. Each side claimed their stance represented strength. Critics saw leniency as dangerous softness. Supporters saw it as confidence, proof America did not fear cultural contact with captives. The divide was sharp, but never settled. Over time, the concerts continued despite opposition. The military, weighing risks and benefits, allowed them to proceed. Order mattered more than optics, and the songs undeniably helped keep thousands of men calmer. In town, conversations grew quieter, less heated. People adapted. The extraordinary gradually became ordinary. Women walking into camps, prisoners applauding, guards standing firm while melodies carried across fences into summer fields. The divide never fully disappeared, but its sharpest edges dulled. Life moved forward, war continued overseas, yet within these debates lay a deeper truth. Humanity itself was contested ground, even on the home front. And so, while German prisoners carried memories of music, American communities carried their own, arguments, doubts, and convictions about what it meant to be merciful in wartime, and whether kindness itself could ever be a weapon. When the concerts ended and the women departed, silence always settled over the camp. Yet within the barracks, the air hummed with recollection. Prisoners replayed every detail, holding on to memories like lifelines. Men described the way a soprano held a note, or how a pianist bowed with a smile. Trivial details magnified. Perfume lingering faintly, sunlight glinting off a brooch, laughter carrying through summer air. Some prisoners wrote letters, carefully navigating censors. They hinted at kindness glimpsed behind wire, at songs that reminded them of home, at strangers who called them gentlemen. Families reading these words struggled to believe them. In German villages ravaged by war, such accounts sounded surreal. Mothers expected tales of cruelty, hunger, despair. Instead, sons wrote cautiously of music and unexpected respect, shaking families already struggling to reconcile defeat. Inside the camps, the memories lingered long after applause faded. Prisoners hummed refrains while repairing farm tools. Others rehearsed secretly, preparing their own songs to share, turning captivity into a strange rehearsal for cultural exchange. The impact went deeper than entertainment. For men stripped of identity, treated as numbers, being applauded for German songs reaffirmed dignity. Their culture, their traditions, had not been erased by wire or defeat. One recalled lying awake, imagining his wife back in Germany, her voice blending with the women he'd heard. Another admitted he no longer knew what to believe about enemies capable of such kindness. Some carried guilt. They ate well while families starved, heard music while loved ones hid from bombs. Yet even guilt could not erase the solace of those moments, nor the gratitude they inspired. Guards noticed changes too. Barracks grew calmer after concerts. Fewer fights broke out, tempers softened. Even work details felt less strained. Songs had achieved what orders and punishments could rarely accomplish: cooperation through quiet hope. Historians later observed that these memories shaped post-war attitudes. Former prisoners often contrasted their treatment in America with harsher captivity elsewhere. The concerts, above all, became symbols of America's surprising, unsettling humanity. Some prisoners even formed choirs, practicing after hours. Their voices rose in German folk tunes, weaving nostalgia with survival. For them, music became more than memory. It became resistance against despair, proof they were still human. The anticipation of the next concert gave many something to endure for. Days felt less endless with the possibility of hearing another song, another smile, another reminder of life beyond the wire. When repatriation eventually came, men boarded ships not only with duffel bags but with intangible treasures, songs echoing in memory, voices carried across oceans, fragments of kindness held closer than medals or weapons. Back in Germany, their stories spread. Villagers listened, astonished, as returning soldiers described orderly camps, steady meals, and women who walked among enemies offering music. These accounts clashed violently with propaganda's painted horrors. For many, the concerts became proof that the world was not as Nazi slogans had declared. Enemies could still show decency. Culture could still connect across fences. Humanity could survive even in captivity. The legacy of these impressions endured quietly for decades. In memoirs and interviews, former prisoners recalled those nights not as entertainment, but as turning points. Moments when war's hatred cracked, letting something else shine through. Even years later, when they spoke to children or grandchildren, the details remained vivid. They remembered the music, yes, but above all, they remembered the women, their courage, their warmth, their disarming, unforgettable presence. And so, long after the war's end, the lasting impression of captivity in America was not the fences or towers, but evenings when kindness crossed enemy lines, carried by voices that refused to be silenced. When the war finally ended, prisoners packed duffel bags with belongings, ready for the long voyage home. Yet what they carried most vividly were not objects, but memories, songs, voices, and moments that had defied war. On ships bound for Europe, conversations often drifted back to concerts. Men spoke less about rations or labor and more about the surreal evenings when American women walked into camps, smiling and singing for enemies. Back in Germany, these stories spread quickly. Families listened in disbelief as sons described plentiful food, orderly camps, and music drifting across barbed wire. Such accounts contrasted painfully with propaganda's images of cruelty and decay. For war-weary civilians, the stories carried symbolic weight. In villages reduced to rubble, men recalled Silent Night sung in 2 languages, or the moment an American woman addressed them as gentlemen. These memories offered hope. Historians later noted the subtle power of these recollections. While bitterness remained, many former prisoners privately contrasted their treatment in America with harsher conditions elsewhere. It softened perceptions, planting seeds of respect for democratic values. Some even admitted the concerts shaped their view of post-war cooperation. If enemies could share songs in captivity, perhaps rebuilding together was possible. Cultural memory became a quiet ally in Germany's slow reconciliation with defeat. The concerts lived on in memoirs, diaries, and interviews. Decades later, elderly men spoke with misty eyes about music rising into summer air, about applause that made them feel like human beings again. For the Americans, the events often faded into background memory. Folded into larger wartime service efforts, they were overshadowed by battles, victories, and losses. Yet for prisoners, they remained unforgettable, etched permanently in consciousness. Guards, too, reflected later. Some admitted they had opposed the concerts, fearing danger. But in hindsight, many recognized those nights as the only times prisoners looked less like captives and more like ordinary men. The legacy was not measured in statistics or reports, but in human memory. A smile, a wave, a song. These small gestures carried more weight than official policies or military strategies ever could. Even decades later, former prisoners told children and grandchildren of evenings when war paused at the edge of a stage. They spoke of music that reached across wire, proving humanity could not be erased. The legacy also revealed something larger about America. By choosing generosity where brutality was expected, it demonstrated power not just through weapons, but through culture and compassion. That decision echoed far beyond the camps themselves. Of course, concerts did not erase the war's scars. Families still mourned, cities lay in ruins, and wounds of occupation lingered. Yet within the rubble, memories of music provided fragile threads of connection. Over time, as Europe rebuilt, these recollections became part of broader narratives about reconciliation. Shared culture, even briefly exchanged in captivity, helped soften hostility and allowed cooperation to take root in post-war relationships. The legacy endured quietly, like an echo. It was not shouted, not celebrated with parades, but whispered in memoirs, family stories, and oral histories, reminders of moments when kindness slipped unexpectedly into history's darkest hours. For many prisoners, those concerts became proof that the world was not as propaganda had painted it. Enemies could still be human. Music could still bridge divides. War could not smother every spark of compassion. And so, long after towers crumbled and fences rusted away, the memory survived. In song, in story, in silence broken by music, humanity left its mark, lasting proof that even in war, empathy endures. The legacy of those nights was simple, yet profound. Enemies could see each other not as faceless foes, but as people. And in that recognition, the first steps toward peace were quietly, irrevocably taken.